some water, did some stretching, and are ready to join us for our final conversation of our time. Okay. If you're here, if you could go ahead and let us know in the chat so that we can make sure that we're not kicking things off before folks are here with us. Anything in the chat, maybe your favorite word, your favorite feeling, throw it in there. All right, I see some folks jumping in. Thank you for that, everyone. All right, so hello, everyone who is joining us for the first time during our event today, and for those of you that have taken this really beautiful journey with us throughout the day to learn so much from so many powerful speakers, speaking to the ways that justice can look like safety, can look like trust, and will join me in this conversation with a tremendous human to talk about how, justice can also look like hope. So I'll start by introducing myself. Hello, everyone. I'm Simone Fuller. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm currently the co-director of our Restorative Justice Project at Impact Justice. I am also a daughter. I am a big sister. I'm a granddaughter. I'm a partner, and I'm someone who believes very deeply in the power of community and advocating for an equitable distribution of resources for healing and for well-being. I love to be outside. I love to travel. I love to laugh at corny jokes for me. And I'm really grateful for all of the powerful lessons I've had the opportunity to learn from all of my various teachers and mentors throughout my life. Those include my mother and my grandmothers, as well as several strong women of color that I've worked with across the years, including this very phenomenal human I'm here with today. Before we dive in, I also wanted to make a note that the other speaker that was slated for this session, another powerful leader and mentor in this work that folks have already spoken to, Fania Davis, unfortunately had something come up unexpectedly, and she'll no longer be able to join us for this session, but we are sending so much gratitude for Fania's work in this space and the lessons that she has shared with so many of us that we think will be reflected in our conversation still today. So with that, I would love to introduce you all to Sujatha Baliga. Sujatha is a powerhouse in this work. She has been, foundational to the learning and a lot of the work that folks have been able to build from in the Bay Area for decades at this point. Sujatha's work is characterized by an equal dedication to crime survivors and people who have caused harm. She is a former victims advocate and a public defender who in 2008 was awarded a Soros Fellowship, where she used to launch a pre-charge restorative justice diversion program in Oakland, connected with some of the great partners at Community Works. And most recently, Sujatha was the former director of the Restorative Justice Project at Impact Justice and has since been named a 2019 MacArthur Fellow. In her time, she continues to advise our work at Impact Justice, as well as the Collective Healing and Transformation Program in Contra Costa County. And if all of that is not enough, right, she's on sabbatical. She's also currently working on writing some of her vast wisdom in her first book. So we'll all be on the lookout for that once we have the chance to check it out. Sujatha, I'm so grateful that we are having, this is our first conversation together in a public forum. And I'm really looking forward to diving into these questions with you. The first question that I want to start with, and in your answer, I invite you to add more that you want to introduce yourself with. But my question for you is, knowing that you have been in this work for a while, you've been steeped in restorative justice work for decades, and so much of that early work in restorative justice started right here in the Bay Area in San Francisco and Oakland. And I'm wondering if you could start by sharing a bit about your introduction to restorative justice and what inspired you to develop restorative justice diversion work that you started, and what was your hope in starting that work?
Thank you so much for that warm introduction, and thank you for inviting me to tell you a little bit about myself. I've been hearing a lot from my Indigenous friends, and this morning literally was in this conversation about the value of land acknowledgements versus just dropping into being influenced by and welcoming to Indigenous ways of being by simply introducing ourselves the way that Indigenous people do. And so I really appreciated hearing more about you, Simone, and about your relationships with others. And I'll start in the same way. So I too am a daughter, and I am a mother, and I'm an aunt and a sister and a wife, partner. I am a student, and I have learned from so many people. So much of my work is completely due to all of the, in India, we would say whose feet we touch instead of whose shoulders we're standing on. So there are so many people whose feet I've had the blessing of touching and receiving blessings from to learn and do the work that I do the world over, particularly Mennonite folks and Tibetan Buddhist folks and Indigenous people the world over that I owe so much of my learning to in the work that I do. And so what drew me to restorative justice? So I was a victim advocate for several years, and I went to law school. It's kind of funny when I think back on it, thinking that I was going to be a prosecutor because I was working specifically in the fields of intimate partner and sexual violence. And there was sort of a monolithic view that the way that we could end these harms in our families was to rely on the criminal legal system. And for me personally, that never felt like the right approach. And yet it was sort of the only thing on offer. It's not surprising I did not end up becoming a prosecutor, in part because it's nothing that I would have ever relied on in the problems that were happening in my own family, right? And so there's always been this thirst to find other ways of healing and moving forward in a good way without reliance on systems that separate us and further harm us. And so that sort of, I think, the original seed was that wishing not only that there could be healing and safety for myself, but that there could be healing and safety for the people who've harmed me, including my father. And so that's like the real original impetus, was sort of a spiritual and religious inclination towards interdependence and understanding that when I think about the word Ubuntu and I am because we are, or a person is a person through other people, that is literally true of the person who caused me the most harm in my childhood, my father. I literally am because he is. And I think that, literally being his biological child. And so I think that that's really where my road to restorative justice started. But the first time I heard the words was from my friend, Susan Marcus. We were in law school and she had become a real devotee of the writings and thinking of Howard Zehr and the Mennonite folks who were just down the road from us on the East Coast at that time. And she also started deepening her relationship with a person named Burma Bushy, who was leading the work in Hollow Water, Manitoba, which was, an Ojibwa community that was looking at how they might end the sexual abuse that was happening, transgenerational sexual abuse in their community. And so folks have a chance to check it out. You can watch a brilliant movie that was made on it. It's called Hollow Water, and you can get it for free online. The Canadian Film Review Board makes that available. And it was just truly inspirational looking at how it is that the Ojibwa people found a way in this tiny community to sit in circles and apply their own medicine to harms that they'd experienced both through their boarding school crisis and the aftermath of alcoholism and intrafamilial violence that followed. And so this lit my heart on fire, but I had moved, I think, to India at this point and was there studying the Tibetan system of justice prior to Chinese occupation. And as I was sharing with my friend Susan by email, which was a new thing for us way back then, just dating myself, we were like just starting to email each other from across the oceans. And Susan, everything I would tell her about what I was learning about the Tibetan system of justice, she would say, I've been talking to you about this for years. This is restorative justice. You're talking about restorative justice. And so when I came back to the United States, I ended up at that point was living in New Mexico. And on September 11th, 2001, I got a phone call from a friend who said that there were some folks who wanted to do a healing circle for those of us. It was interesting because the way it was introduced to me, the idea is we heard your nation has been attacked. And so I guess some Indigenous folks had invited us. They said, we heard your nation has been attacked. We want to help you heal. And so that was the first time I was in circle. And that was it for me. I really realized that if at the moment when we are most likely to respond with punitiveness in our hearts, people give us 5 hours in a sweat to speak and speak and speak and speak. And I knew some people, some of my classmates actually from law school lost their lives in the World Trade Center. And so this was a space for me to find another way and to see it in real time in relationship to my own suffering. So several years flash forward, so I was a public defender in New Mexico, New York, and the whole time I was practicing law, I was like, this is not it. Like, we could be doing better than this. We're not serving survivors. We're not serving the people that my clients who I was coming to be in deep relationship with. And I landed in California. And in 2006, Susan Marcus once again was like, you have to talk to Fania Davis. And so I cold called her and showed up at her office. And within the first 2 minutes of meeting her, I was like, oh my goodness, I have so much to learn from this amazing person. And so I'm so sad that she's not able to join us today, because one of our favorite things to do is just chat and reminisce about the trajectory of things from 2006 until now. But I'm getting texts from her that she is on a mission to do some important work with regards to justice for people who are very close to her. And so she's on an airplane right now, and in typical Fania fashion is always doing the right thing and where she needs to be. And so I hope I will do justice to her part of the story. But basically, starting in 2006, there were just like 8 of us. I mean, she started in 2005. They had founded Our Joy, in the basement of somebody else's nonprofit. We were sitting in these little circles and dreaming, imagining a world in which there might be circle keepers in schools, and there might be an alternative to locking children up, and that there might be better ways at reentry than a probation officer, and that this could be something that we could do and hold in community, and that Our Joy might be, a place from which all of these things might grow. And her vision was so vast and so broad and so deep. And I just, literally owe everything to her for sort of pushing me off the bus of the practice of law. And then it was a few years later where I was like, Fania, you made me quit practicing law. How come you're still practicing law? And so we kind of credit each other for getting us to quit. And so, and to not to quit the law, but more to follow our hearts in the right direction of what it is that we wanted to do and what we wanted to see. And so there were 3 main areas that we were all working in at the time. Some of us were looking at COSAs, which were circles of support and accountability, as a reentry model for young people coming out of the juvenile detention facility there, the youth lockup. And some of us were trying to build what now exists at OUSD, really, and other schools across the nation. And some of us, primarily me at that time, was building the diversion work, which felt like a real uphill battle, trying to convince folks that you could actually not charge young people or anyone really with crimes, and that you could actually divert this to a community-based organization, and we could do this process. And, early on, really partnering with the district attorneys who were willing. Matt Gold at that time was the head of the juvenile division, which I hear he is the head of the juvenile division again. It was a really heavy lift in the beginning, but really what we did was that we created a broad-based community connection with multiple nonprofits. We connected with Catholic Charities of the East Bay, who had some inclinations already towards restorative justice. And Millie Burns and Denise Curtis were instrumental in getting this thing moving. And Denise and I co-facilitated all the first few cases. And we had Judge Gail Barriola holding a monthly session at the JJC, where nonprofits and community partners and systems partners from across the county would meet on a monthly basis, and we would sit in circle and we would imagine, again, what might this look like? We came up with a strategic plan for the entire county to move towards restorative justice, and some of those things happened and some of them didn't, but it was in that continual collective imagining that everything got started. And it's just unbelievable to imagine that was 2006, where we were literally saying these words, restorative justice, and people were like, what? And now it's like, now we're kind of like, now everybody's saying restorative justice, and it doesn't always mean restorative justice. So it's sort of like, we got what we wanted. Everybody's saying it, not always the way we want them to. But that's, I hope that I didn't go on too long, but that's a little bit of the background of how things got started, and how we sort of started to dream and imagine what a more interdependent and less separation-based model of addressing our harms, our needs and our harms could look like in the Bay Area.
Yeah, that's certainly not too much information. And it's such a rich kind of arc of how the work began in a communal visioning of what was possible, and then started to break into how to, make those things come to life. And, now to your point, restorative justice is something that, is bringing over 100 people to a session to learn more about it. Or, we are seeing partners across the country like really live into this desire to understand restorative justice more and develop ways that folks can be brought into these processes. And it's really exciting. And so much of that is rooted in some of those early works from folks like yourself and Fania. One of the things that we've had the pleasure of talking through with the other panels today is kind of the ways in which restorative justice is both this opportunity to really address interpersonal harm, right? And bring folks together to address, what is needed to make things right and move forward when harm has occurred. But I think we also know, and folks have hinted towards, the ways that restorative justice is more than just that opportunity to kind of connect and heal at the interpersonal level. It's a really powerful tool at the communal and the societal level. And so I wonder if you could speak to the ways that you see restorative justice in that lens as that communal and societal offering.
Absolutely. And this is where I really wish Fania were here with us today, but, she speaks about this so brilliantly. But, I really love that Brian Stevenson says, truth and reconciliation are sequential. Truth and reconciliation are sequential. But I think that there are a lot of steps in between truth and reconciliation. And to my mind, restorative justice sits in the middle. The possibilities of reconciliation at the individual and the societal level require asking, what has happened? What needs to happen now so that we can move forward collectively in a good way? And what's the plan to make that happen, right? These are some, they seem like practical things, but they're quite spiritual things as well. And I don't know that there's that huge of a difference when we're talking about a small circle where we're repairing a harm, say within my family, versus in terms of of course, in terms of scope, it's different, but in terms of the philosophy, and the steps required, I think they're the same even at a national level. And so to my mind, right, where I first actually read the words of restorative justice in print was in No Future Without Forgiveness by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, talking about the national truth and reconciliation process in South Africa. Now, obviously with things like blanket amnesty that happen in those kinds of national truth and reconciliation approaches, it doesn't always attend to the needs of each individual harmed. So I think that there are ways in which we can improve on those models so that we're really attending to individual harms while we're looking at systemic harms. But overall, when we talk about implementing something like diversion programs where people don't get charged in the first place, where we are treating things in a non-criminalized way, there are ways in which that does produce a repair or a redirection away from the structural harms that the system continues to cause, right? And so there's both, like, we can do big, broad things like truth and reconciliation commissions, which we absolutely need to do. Both the original, the first harm, which was the taking of this land, and then the next major moral blight, which was, the chattel slavery and the enslavement of African folks here on this land. We're not really going to move forward, to my mind, until we really take those on as a nation. I think we're going to keep having the same problems and over. And I find it really interesting that Archbishop Desmond Tutu characterizes that as restorative justice, right? And so So we need to do those big things. And we need to see the ways in which we implement these more individualized processes systemically in a way that repairs structural inequities, right? So you can't just start a restorative justice program and think that that's going to solve racism unless you do it in a way that is attended to structural oppression, and that makes it a point to address racial and ethnic disparities in the systems in which you are partnering with in order to implement these processes. And so, so I think that there's that balance that needs to happen. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, to follow up on some of the points you made, it's this opportunity to really talk about truth and harm at all of the levels in which it comes into both the interpersonal, the communal, and the societal level, right? Like the harm of some of those first harms, like slavery, like that becoming the foundation for kind of what is now understood as our criminal legal system, which then is the foundation for the criminalization of people of color, which is then the backdrop to justification around a inadequate distribution and a removal of resources from those communities that is then woven around when interpersonal harm happens. That's all so important to dive into in a restorative justice process. And I think restorative justice offers us the tools to kind of think about the level of truth telling and the space that's necessary for that truth telling to happen so that we can start to think about what would it look like to make things right. I was listening. Oh,
yeah,
go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you.
I was just going to say, I was listening to a podcast, which, I say constantly. So I was listening to a podcast earlier this week, and they were talking about this notion of neuroplasticity, which is basically the concept that the brain has the ability to change and learn over time. And how that neuroplasticity is connected to well-being and kind of how practices in well-being can help us, our brain develop more neuroplasticity and take on more change. And so when they were talking about the core tenets of what well-being is, they referenced awareness, insight, connection, and purpose. And to me, and I think to those of us in this space, we recognize those in restorative practices. We recognize those things as part of what comes about in restorative justice work. And so I've been thinking about the ways in which when we really step into a space where we allow restorative justice to become more of what we lean on, we also have the chance to really showcase for people that change is possible, right? Yes. And what's necessary for change. And I think, the broader topic of this session of hope, right? Restore some hope that things can change, that change is possible. Because I think a lot of people really question what change is possible, what's actually going to change. And I think that these are restorative justice processes are kind of a way to really indicate that change is possible.
Absolutely. Well, we get to see it when we do restorative processes, right? We get to see that when, so for me, I'm Buddhist. And so, I come from a culture that really understands both interdependence and change as being fundamentally true. So regardless of whether or not we believe it, it is happening right now. Like this table I'm sitting in front of, I think it's really solid, but it's actually decomposing, right? And it's really like molecules are moving all the time. So we don't have to. One of the things that makes me most hopeful is that if I'm having a bad day, if I'm like, it's never going to change, it doesn't really matter what I think because it is changing. Right now, everything is actually changing. And so it's a lot of hubris for me to think otherwise. And so that's always humbling. Another thing that really helps me is that what I love about watching it in real time and facilitating restorative practices is that you get to see that things are as good as the ingredients you put into it. You know this when you're cooking dinner tonight. Like if you're going to go buy the bougie ingredients and you're going to take the time and you're going to slow down and that is going to be delicious. And if you make it out of a box, it's not going to be nutritious and it's not going to be right. And the same thing is true. It's just the law of cause and effect. We don't have to it's not like rocket science, right? It's just true that if we put good stuff in it, it's going to be good. And if we give young people a chance, if we, we always say second chances. I'm like, how about it's actually first chances? Like, how about we didn't actually give somebody a first chance? And so let's try it and see what happens. And, uniformly, my experience has been that when we wrap around and we say, you made this mistake, and we want to know why, and we want to really look at those root causes, and we want to acknowledge, historical causes that are beyond the capacity of this immediate group of people to do anything about, but naming it is validating, and that's a good place to start too. And then these things that you're mentioning, like insight and awareness, I mean, they naturally occur when we lovingly create space in which these things can happen. If I come with a hammer and then I ask you to be self-aware, that's not going to happen, right? But if I come with an open heart, with curiosity, with love, sometimes it takes a little time, but it's always been my experience that people shift and change. Even the people I would otherwise consider my enemy shift and change. And so that's, that always gives me hope. But I think also it's just like I hopped on at the end of the last session, and what gives me hope is all the young people. I know I'm like my gray hair and my calling y'all the young people, but I really do feel incredible. I mean, like, you're all light years ahead of where I was at your age. And that gives me a ton of hope. And also just the collectivity, right? The fact that back in the day, we started doing this Circle Keepers Circle, and it feels like, there's a way in which the community is so interwoven. The fact that this event is happening and all these different organizations that are committed to restorative justice are showing up for each other, and for the collective conversation is so important. It really does build this feeling like we got us, which is at the base. Restorative justice. Any one of us can be having a bad day or a bad month or a bad year. If we have us collectively, then there's going to be the collective is going to be able to hold it. So that also just gives me a ton of hope. But these things that you're talking about, right? This awareness, this insight, they come from interconnectedness. They come from this feeling of collectivity, without which, it's. So one of the things I find most interesting about solitary confinement, it's horrifying, actually, I shouldn't use the word interesting, is that we lose our grip on reality when we are isolated. Like, you literally don't know, like, is this a table I'm sitting at? Well, did I see something out of the corner of my eye? If there's not somebody to check it against, we don't know whether or not that really happened. And what we're starting to learn, I think a really important Eighth Amendment argument that needs to be made, is that actually changes your brain, that there's a physiological change in your brain if you are left in solitary confinement for too long. And isn't that the same kind of torture that we outlaw by saying you can't cut off somebody's hand or whatever, right? So this to me is a really interesting question, that we literally need one another in order to make sure that reality is what it is. And when we do have each other, when we can say, yeah, actually, this is a world that we live in, and this is what we can co-create. And when we start to feed those kinds of positive ideas into the collective, really beautiful things can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think my next question might be something that we've started to wander into already, but it's kind of this notion about, I think oftentimes, especially in a justice conversation, and for folks that come to this maybe from the justice space, or, are looking to learn more about what restorative justice looks like in, thinking about safety, they oftentimes kind of locate it as a program, right? Like, it's a program that I'm going to just get and do. And so many folks have spoken to this point that restorative justice is beyond a program. It is so much more than a program. And there's so much more foundational work and understanding that has to go into restorative justice work that is authentic, and that is meant to kind of hold the space that we're talking about. And so I wonder what you might say to that point around, when people are thinking of restorative justice as kind of a program, what more is there for them to understand?
Oh my goodness. What a great question. I think that it is at base about we need to humble ourselves in these processes and walk the walk ourselves. So there, when we think about programs, we start to think about professionals, we start to think about experts, and we start to think about, structures. But the thing that really needs to happen is that people need to sit in circle, in conferences, in collective accountability processes ourselves before we think that we're qualified to go out and do it for anybody else. And this is, and this doesn't mean that everybody has to have done every single kind of model that they're training other people in, but rather that we have done the deep work of excavating, why are you here? Why do you want to do this work? And if it's like a charity model, if it's a fix it, if it's a bring it and fix some other community that I'm not a part of, everybody's going to smell that, and it's not going to last. So to my mind, what is restorative justice? I tend to sit with a more sort of ideologically broad view, but a sort of, in that it is about Ubuntu, it is about interdependence. And there's so many different ways to come into those ideas in your life. And then when we talk about repairing harm, I think it really needs to start with this, like what happened and what needs to happen now, and who is harmed and what do they need, and whose obligation is it to meet those needs. And to be in the work of restorative justice, we have to answer those questions ourselves. So how was I harmed? And how have I harmed other people? And it is through having sat in countless circles where I have grappled with both of those questions, that I feel like I can do this work. And so if people come with a charity mindset, it's not going to work. And I worry that like programs and that kind of thing, really, they create this like opportunity for expertification and, just coming into it for a job. When we started this work, there were no restorative justice jobs. Like the first 8 of us didn't have any job. And I understand people need jobs. And of course we're like trying to raise money so that people can have jobs in this work. It is something that should be remunerated. And I'm so grateful to have a job in restorative justice. So I don't want to poo-poo that. But I do feel like it's deeply important for us to walk the talk ourselves, to learn how to say, I'm sorry, to hear when people are angry at us, even if we don't understand what we did wrong, so that we can have deeper understandings of where things went off the rails. That's how we move forward in a good way. So yeah, our programs are great and we should have them. We need structures. We need ways of rolling things out. All of that is good. It's just that if it's not standing on the ground of people having done their own deep work around a deep personal commitment and a collective commitment to interdependence, excavating what our own desires are and our needs are in this work. Why did we come to this? Then the work is not going to be as rich. And it's just going to be another program. It's going to be another flash in the pan instead of, the revolution that it could be. Right. And so that's what I'm going for, hopefully.
Yes, the beautiful revolution that could be, and that I think, is, and, will only grow in its presence as we let ourselves kind of step into that fact that like everybody is invited to do that work. Everybody is invited to really sit with what is calling you to restorative justice. What makes you think that this is something that you want to be a part of and do, and ask those questions first before just kind of, thinking that this is like, I can just get this thing and be done, right? Like I'll get this thing and then, so I've solved it. I've solved justice.
Right.
There's so much to do. There's so much reflection to do. And, that invitation is for all. Do that reflection, right? And reflection might help you understand that the way you thought you would be involved isn't the way you're involved, right? Yes. But there is a way that everybody can be helping to move this thing forward. A number of different ways. That might not mean that you are a restorative justice facilitator, but you could be an advocate for restorative practices. You could be helping to move resources so that restorative justice can be fully present and realized. There's so many ways. So
yes. Yes, I want to. One of my favorite things that some folks here may have done a Rockwood Leadership Institute training or workshop or a longer program. And if you have, one of the things that they make you do is there's this one activity where they make you answer the same question over and over and over again. It's torture. And the one that I was given was, how do I lie? Oh, it was horrible. And so I had to sit there face to face with another person. I'll never forget it. It was Michael Smith. And Michael's sitting across from me, and he says your name, and then he asks the question, Sujatha, how do you lie? It's not why or do you lie, but how. Like, we all tell lies, lie to ourselves, we lie to, whatever. And then I answer the question, and then he pauses, we both take a breath, and then he asks me again, how else do you lie? How else? It goes on forever. It literally goes on forever. And by the end, everybody's weeping. And in the Ahimsa Collective, Sonia Shah does a similar thing when she asks people about why they want to be facilitators in prison. And it's just the question, why are you here? And then she starts asking reallys. Why are you really here? Why are you really, really here? Why are you really, really, really here? And some of the answers are ugly, y'all. Like, so many answers are not pretty, but we have to face them. Why are we really, 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 really? And the final answer is going to be a good one, because we're interdependent, because we don't want the world to be like this. That's a good answer, but there's some ugly answers along the way, and it's okay. It's okay, but we have to ask ourselves all of those reallys. Some of them will break our hearts. Some of them will make us ashamed of ourselves. Some of them will make us proud of ourselves, and it's a great journal opportunity. If you want to do restorative justice, why do you really want to do it? Why do you really, really want to do it? Why do you really, 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 the 8th and 9th, really, you're going to be getting some good stuff. So,
yes. Yeah, I love that. That is like a concrete thing that folks are invited to take away from this right away, that question, that series of questions to kind of journal with yourself. That's a great offering. On that kind of topic around, sometimes this will be challenging. Sometimes we will be faced with hard truths. Sometimes we, will be able to step into moments of being proud and opportunities to lean deeper into. When you think about kind of the evolution of restorative justice work and the way that you've seen it over the past, several years, what are some of the challenges that you think folks should be cautious of or be mindful of? And then maybe what are some of the opportunities that you see that folks could really kind of lean deeper into and be considering in a different way?
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to do that same thing now. I'm going to be an old lady, and I'm going to say, I remember back in the day way back in the day, when restorative justice was just literally becoming words that people were saying, right? And the words are generally attributed to a man named Howard Zare. And I would strongly suggest people read his sort of seminal text, it's called Changing Lenses. And I would get the 25th anniversary edition or 20th anniversary, whichever one came out a few years ago, because it's made some significant changes based on Howard's reflections on the new Jim Crow, and so what he's learned from his friendship with Michelle Alexander. But so Howard Zare said these words, restorative justice, and he defined it in this particular way about, process to involve, to the extent possible, all those who have a stake in a specific offense in order to collectively identify and address harms, needs, and obligations in order to put things as right as possible. It's pretty academic, but basically it's about doing right. Folks coming together, face-to-face dialogues, in which there's collective decision-making and folks learning how to make things right. So that is, and Howard comes to this. If you read Changing Lessons, you see that he comes to this from his own deep excavation of his journey as a Mennonite man who comes from, a very particular culture of Mennonite people. And he does a deep examination of his Bible and this word covenant, and what does it mean to come up with a covenant justice? What does it mean to be in covenant? And it's just beautiful to watch somebody look deeply at their own traditions and their own journey to come to this. But what happened after Howard came up with these wonderful words was that it went in a very particular way, and that way was not welcoming and open to people of color, and it was not concerned with, and this is not at all coming from Howard, but I think that there are ways in which Howard is a very quiet and humble man. He is very Mennonite, and he's very unassuming for being sort of an international rock star. It's kind of funny when you get to know him, but he didn't, he like didn't explicitly frame it as a thing around racial justice. And because of that, while he certainly was aware of and acknowledged it in his writings, and that his own thinking very much grew from, he was the first white man to graduate from Morehouse, like in 1964 or something. And he went there to humble himself and to learn. But he doesn't, I think that he was hesitant to sort of frame it outside of his own cultural understanding, which I think there was wisdom in that. Regardless, the point is that for many, many years, when Fania and I got started, all we'd hear is restorative justice is for white people. Restorative justice is for white people, right? And then some people started to look to indigenous communities, but then things got appropriated, and then it was just like shopping, like let's go grab other people's cultural practices and call that restorative justice. And then, so that was one sort of wing of the thing. And then the other wing of the thing, and the bigger wing of the thing in the 1980s, was to systematize it through the federal government. So I don't know how many people remember this, but it's the Balanced and Restorative Justice Act occurred, and tons of money got dumped into the creation of a curriculum that basically co-opted and watered down everything good about restorative justice and turned it into completely not restorative justice. And we used to joke back in the day, because I was still fighting the sort of demon of barge, is what it was called, balanced and restorative justice. Barge, it was like a barge, it's like battling the barge of restorative justice and its past iterations. And this idea that like, giving victims an opportunity to testify at the end of a criminal trial where their words actually have no weight on the outcome. Victim impact statements were called restorative justice, right? All this stuff was like, I'm like, that none of that is restorative justice. And when Alex Buzansky, the president of Impact Justice, met me, he used to joke when, in the beginning of our time together, he says, this is Sujatha, she runs our That's Not Restorative Justice project, because I spent so much time explaining that like barge and everything that flowed from it was not RJ the way we were talking about RJ. It's not the way Fania was talking about it, not the way Community Works was talking about it. It's not the way, I was thinking about it. It wasn't the way Rita Alfred, Ranjitham was thinking about it. Like none of us, we were all thinking about it differently. And trying to roll things out really differently. And so it's not the way Catholic Charities was thinking about it, So I just think that I think that this is like the big takeaway is how, when something grows, I'm watching it right now. There's this huge battle around the Violence Against Women Act. People have tried to put restorative justice into it. It's getting co-opted. It doesn't look like restorative justice anymore, but now funding is getting attached to it. And now there are people who try to shut it down, and there are other people who are trying to compromise it. How does it not get co-opted? How does it not get turned into a systematized thing such that it loses what it is, which is at its base about community. It needs to live in community. It needs to be owned by community. It is at base, we got us. It is not somebody else does this to us, right? That is not what it is. It's not like getting sentenced to restorative justice. It's none of that, right? And so that I think is a really important part of what we need to know. I'm so sorry, my dog is barking, my doorbell is ringing. That's what's happening right now.
Yeah, I think those are wise words. And even in our own work, I think so many of us are grappling with that inclination that folks have to kind of, compromise and co-opt and, water down some of the most things that are core to restorative practices and restorative justice. And like you said, community, like the wrapping around and reminding folks that they are a part of something much bigger, a community that, wants them to be accountable to that community and is lovingly inviting them to be in that community and help them, meet whatever need that they have to be, in that community in a right way. I think that's just so fundamental. It can't be left out. It can't be left out from a restorative justice process. So I appreciate you naming that. we have about 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure that, I remind folks that if you have questions for Sujatha or for this discussion, please go ahead and add them in the queue and we'll get to them. But I wanted to just make sure that we, circle back to the topic at hand, hope, and just invite you to share what keeps you hopeful in this work, right? You've been doing this work for so long, and you've seen it evolve, and you've kind of walked us through the ways that there are cautionary tales and ways that we should be thoughtful about it. And still here we are, and you are still in this work. And so many of us are still in this work and care about this work deeply. What keeps you hopeful?
Oh, well, at risk of embarrassing you, you, and, the fact that I got to walk away from Impact Justice to write books and do this next thing, and seeing how much the work is flourishing, and just people taking it to places that Fania and I never dreamed of, and, dreamed big, and then beyond. Right. And then, so you, Jody, Geddes, like, oh, I can't just name every single person on this call, right? I mean, every single person that's spoken today, every single direction that it has gone, the fact that it is goodness, and it will grow, right? It's gonna, like, people are made out of love, and RJ is good, and so love feeds the good, and so it's just it's contagious. It's a virus in all the good ways, and we have to remember that that's happening. And so I do fundamentally believe this. What I was saying earlier too about change, like, it doesn't matter whether or not I believe in it or not. It's happening. This table is changing into its next life. Everything is changing. And I really do believe, I spent a lot of time looking at outer space and remembering how small we are and how gorgeous it all is, and how the universe is just unfolding and enfolding and doing what it does beyond our understanding. That really helps me feel hopeful. I try to do one case a year myself, even though I say I'm not gonna. I end up, somebody calls me and says, will you just do this once? Usually some sexual violence case, because that's the issue closest to my heart, and it's usually something off the grid. And watching people wake up when they understand, when they are told by the person that they harmed, oh, this is what no means no means. Oh, I get it now. Like, watching the light bulbs go off. Just doing one case every once in a while gives me hope. I'm like, right, like, this is still a really awesome thing that really works, that gives me hope. The community gives me hope, just seeing all the new directions things are going. I love, just hopping on Facebook every once in a while and seeing that there's some new circle that our Joy's doing. There's some new victim healing circle that Ahimsa Collective's doing, that, Impact Justice has got how many jurisdictions now, how many communities you're working in now, like, what, so that is just really spectacular. Going to the national conference every few years. I'm glad that that's going to be, I have to miss it this year because my nephew went and planned his wedding in the middle of it, which is, a thing. But just being in that big space and so what is happening where all over the world gives me hope. So, and also there's just a way in which the word hope actually is something that we don't have in my religion. We're told to not hope, interestingly. We're told to just rely on cause and effect. Just know. You don't hope, if you put in the good, good is going to come. This is the basics of cause and effect. And so if you have faith in cause and effect and you just keep producing the good, it's coming back around. Like, it just is. So so there's this idea of eschew hope is what they say. They say, really just do the work, and there's no question. You have faith, you don't have hope. You don't have to have hope. And so in some ways there's that, just seeing the evidence that the good is growing. It feels like dark times, so much dark. I'm not using that word anymore. It feels like just impossible times right now in so many ways. But there is this incredible network. The mycelium is doing what it's doing to protect the big trees, and these networks of love and kindness are here all over the world. So yes, with that, I think we should leave some space for Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for those nuggets of hope, or of knowing that there's good that will come from the good. Okay, so I see one question here from Scott Smith. He says, Sujatha and Simone, thank you deeply. One thing that volunteers and staff at our center are in conversation about is that restorative facilitators have to be willing and expecting to be changed by each encounter. For me, this rhymes with what you are discussing about why we are really here. It also points to a huge tension between RJ and how attorneys, POs, probation officers, and even mediators tend to use their roles. Any experience or insight from you about how we can help bring into official systems not only the steps, but the vulnerability and interdependence that RJ needs to thrive?
Oh, what a beautiful question. So I have actually sat in circles with prosecutors. Like one time I took the entire sex crimes unit of a prosecutor's office and sat them in circle. And I know that there are other people who have sat POs in circle, who've sat correctional officers in circles. And I know that this is not the work that most of us are immediately drawn to, right? I just was having this powerful conversation with a friend this morning about the necessity of taking care of our own first. And so I was asking, to avoid appropriation and to make sure that Indigenous folks get credit for the circle keeping that they brought to us, who's training outside their communities. And they're like, oh my gosh, we're so busy with our own communities, right? And I get that being like, I ain't got time to sit in a circle with some POs because I've got, my own people. We're trying to have these homicide circles, or we're trying to have these, right? But I will say that some of the most powerful things I've done is actually sitting with systems partners, just them in circles, holding space for them. I don't think that we understand the degree to which a system of separation and harm is actually harming the systems partners. When I was a criminal defense lawyer, let me tell you, we were being damaged by the work that we did. And I know that people who I know who are prosecutors are exhausted by it too. And so what does it mean to make space, not, for them, for what they suffer in their lives, in their personal lives, in their work lives? Everybody's job is hard. And, we can sit here, for those of us who sit on the abolition side of things, for people who don't believe in the criminal legal system, we can sit there and cross our arms and be like, you people choose to have these jobs, right? But instead, what if it's like, well, what do you need? How are you harmed by the system? What do you need? What's not working? I don't say, how are you harmed by the system that you participate in? That's how I come like, what's not working for you? What's not working? What could be improved? And, what does it look like to sit and listen? And even when some of the stuff in the beginning you hear might not sit right on your heart, but I think it's a deep challenge, but I do it from time to time. And there's so much that I learn. There's so much that I learn with sitting with the other side. And you have to be thoughtful about what you can do. I'm not asking folks to go sit in a circle with white supremacists, but somebody's got to. And if they did, that would be really good. So, so that is a suggestion. I don't think that it should be done at the expense of communities of color or folks, let's not start there. And everybody's always asking me like, well, why can't we do restorative justice when police officers kill unarmed Black men? And I'm just like, well, we can, but will you show me 10 cases, 10 other homicide cases that you're willing to try restorative justice in your jurisdiction for people who aren't police officers? Could we do that? And when the answer is no, then, it's like, well, that you're telling me something about who you value first, or who you think should get RJ first. So, but, that being said, I do from time to time sit in circle with folks who are engaged in systems that I think are damaging to all of us, that need to change.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like Scott got the answers that he was hoping for. So thank you for offering that. I see one question that has come through the chat from Barbara Jones, and it says, how do you have conversations with others who are watering down or co-opting RJ? Can you give one or two examples?
I try to be in direct relationship with those people, especially when they're trying to work in the same jurisdictions or communities that I'm working in. And I try to break it down as to why it is important for them to not do it that way, where we're trying to do it our way, right? So for example, That's one thing, like just direct, like we have to learn to be in conversation with each other, right? So it's like, don't talk smack about people behind their backs, call them up directly and say, hey, your model is wonderful. But if you offer this circle, as sentencing while we're trying to actually circumvent the entire system, they're obviously going to go with your way. Right. And let me explain to you why that's going to undermine what we've been trying to do here for the past 8 years or whatever. Right. So how do we like engage directly and explain why it is? The other thing is that I try to get folks to understand the power over aspect of things when it is the system forcing people to do RJ. Right. Like if you're saying, that, so to me, there are basic elements of what is restorative justice. It's got to be, one in which we're all coming from a place of belief in each other's capacity to change. It's got to live at the community level. Judges and probation officers and systems partners telling somebody something that they have to do and then telling them about themselves isn't going to land the same way it does when it's grandma or your uncle or whatever. So like when we're really putting the power in the hands of the state instead of the power in the hands of the community, we're not really doing RJ, to my mind. And I try to, expose folks to the beauty of that we can actually do this over here. Sometimes I come with data, I show that like, look, this is the recidivism rate. This is the cost savings. This is like, if we do it over here, the real way, it's actually going to be an improvement in these 7 ways, right? But more than anything, it's really important that we not end up creating a really confusing feeding frenzy, ripping each other apart in the restorative justice community, especially around funding, and that we be really mindful of who's working where, what are they already doing, and let's not step on each other's toes. Let's be in deep dialogue so that we can actually come as a uniform front and say, here are all the things that we can offer you, but let's not erode this thing, right? By making other things available. So those are some ideas. And more than anything, I think that what's most moving to people is to see the effectiveness of the real deal. And so as much as we can invite people into the real deal, invite them to have their own personal experience with the real deal, then people get won over by that pretty uniformly. That's been my experience.
Great. Looks like that was helpful. Wonderful. And then I see one more question that I think we might also lean on folks in the chat and in community to offer their suggestions as well. But David Thompson wants to know, are there organizations that specialize in healing circles related to mental health, specifically hurt related to dysregulated behavior?
I don't know of any. I would love for people to throw it into the chat if they do know. But what I have known for some time is that just because we say that it lives at the community level doesn't mean that there can't be other forms of expertise in the circle. And so if someone has a really, really, really great relationship with their psychiatrist, right, I don't understand why that person couldn't be a part of the process. Right? We're talking about folks who have like serious mental health issues. I have a dear, dear friend who's a psychiatrist who works with folks who are unhoused and have serious mental health issues. And she's always pressed me. She's always pressed me to not close the door to restorative justice processes for that community. And that she's like, what other resources are going to be needed in order for that to happen? And so I encourage people to imagine that in a way that isn't, disempowering, not like power over experts have the answer, but rather what does it mean to fold into restorative processes, the resources that are needed in order for that to happen. So chat away about it, folks, if you know. I see another question, if there's time for one more before we close out.
Yep, I think we have a couple minutes from Heather Manchester. So lovely to be with y'all. Thinking about changing, growing, and evolving, thinking about the changing, growing, and evolving of RJ, y'all are speaking to an intergenerational community. Thinking about the youth I get to be in circle and community with, and wondering what opportunities we have to be in more intergenerational spaces and how we can grow more of those spaces. I know many high school youth and recent alumni that would love to be in circle and community with y'all.
Well, how sweet is that? I'm obnoxiously just hanging out with the teenagers I know. And so I do intergenerational stuff, but it's just teenagers that people like I know. And so I get to still be in circle with teenagers. And it is really yummy. But I just think that I have no direct answer to this because I'm not with an organization right now, but I kick it to others to think about it. I mean, what I really miss is through COVID, what I've really missed is we had the Circle Keepers Circle where we all got to be together, and then we planned events and we did things. And so, you know, there's still stuff happening. We used to RJ in the park, and we used to, you know, so, you know, more of that, you know, honestly, Heather, I'm like, go do it. We'll organize it and people will come. I don't put another thing on you because I know you do so much. But yeah, just I don't know. Other people may have ideas on this one.
Yeah, I mean, all I will offer is that it does feel like a really unique opportunity, especially when we're thinking about for folks who do have the experience of going through an RJ process. I'm thinking about all of the ways in which the community conferencing model that we support folks with invites family members, loved ones, supporters, community members to wrap around young people when harm occurs. Like they can then become, right, like involved in future iterations of additional spaces for restorative practices, right? They can become the future facilitators. There can be learning that is done that, you know, allows for that intergenerational connection to be realized, right? Like I love learning from young people. They will get you together quick. They will let you know when they sniff out bull, right? They will make sure that what you are spitting actually lands and is actually relevant. And I think that that is the power of intergenerational work, right? We can make sure that we are adapting what needs to be adapted for things to be received for all of the folks that need to receive them. So I guess, yeah, Heather, like if you're thinking about it, like sit with that and grow it, make it happen. I think that's beautiful. And yeah, it looks like some folks are dropping opportunities in the chats. The weekly restorative justice circles at Our Joy are another space where I bet a lot of intergenerational work is happening. So we will go ahead and close out this time together, Sujatha. It's been so wonderful to just step into these yummy questions with you and hear all of the wisdom that you have to offer. We are going to move towards closing, but you know, we want to thank those in the chat that have engaged in this session with us, offered these questions. Folks, be on the lookout for Sujatha's book. I don't know if there's anything you want to say about that, or if we can just sit in mystery. I'm sure when it comes, we are all going to just learn so much more from that.
It's going to be a minute. I've heard that it takes like a year and a half from when you finish to publishing. I'm almost done. I've got one more chapter to finish, but I'm very close. So it's going to be a minute, but I will certainly get the word out in the RJ community when it's out. It's not specifically about restorative justice. It's actually about forgiveness, but it sort of starts my journey to restorative justice, and it hopefully sets the stage for future books about other things that might be more on point. But anyway, yes, thank you for bringing that up.
Of course. And thank you for, I mean, as somebody who gets to step into some of the work that you've created, I'm just so grateful to you for all that you've offered in this space and to me personally. So thank you for that. Okay. We will go ahead and let you go, Sujatha. Thank you so much. Go ahead and check on your dog and maybe who was at your door. I don't know if they're still there, but maybe go say hey. And I will go ahead and invite Kevin to join me back on screen so we can kind of close up some of this part and invite folks to jump into the breakout sessions in just a minute here. I can't tell. There you are, Kevin. Hey. Okay.
I'm
cool.
here.
You're here.
Yes. Why does it feel like I just ran a marathon with all of these sessions? It was just incredible and amazing. And I think one of the things that stands out to me is that even this live stream was born out of Circle itself, and relationship building between San Francisco Rising, Impact Justice, and Community Works, where we've all come together in the San Francisco Collaborative, Restorative Justice Collaborative, and that this live stream was born out of a lot of love and deep respect for one another, and just to see the overlapping relationships that just extends in every direction. It's just amazing to see live. This is a time of closing. Yes, unfortunately, we're going to close down this part of our time together this afternoon. As we move toward our closing, we want to extend our deepest gratitude and respect for everyone who took the time to join us today and share learning and exploring ways that restorative justice offers a pathway to a vision of justice that centers safety, trust, and hope. I hope you got as much out of it as I have. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Simone, to offer some of your pithy points.
50 points. I love 50 points. Yeah, I mean, I echo the gratitude. I think today we've had the opportunity to learn from so many different folks and hear some really strong takeaways. In our first panel, right, we were invited to think about RJ as a grounding framing for so many spaces, especially in community and power building work, and a pathway towards, more connection and support for wellness and care. And that restorative justice tools, are creating safety. They are creating safety in our schools, in our organizing work, in our communities. And, it is important to make sure that folks are introduced to restorative justice, not just as a response to harm, but well before harm happens, so that they're familiar with it, so that they are kind of steeped in the community building aspect of restorative justice, so that it becomes something that people really see as an opportunity to come into space and address harm when it does happen. In our second panel, we were able to talk about all of the various layers of trust embedded in RJ work, right? There's trust with yourself, and making sure that restorative justice invites us to think about, the trust that we have in our own knowing and our own ability to kind of do right and move forward and heal, but also trust in relationships with others. And, both Amore and Patty offered us some really great nuggets to take away. Right? Trust helps us hold the scaries, as Amore offered for us. And for Patty, right, there's no trust without us. Trust is developed in relationship. And that's where you're able to kind of feel feelings of being held, the joy that comes from trusting somebody fully, the laughter that then results from a space where you feel safe and seen and trust and heard. So, and that vulnerability, Malachi kind of walked us through the ways that vulnerability and trust are so interconnected. And that in so many spaces, vulnerability is seen as a weakness and a kind of scary to extend that kind of trust, but in extending that trust and vulnerability is strength. And then we were able to close out with, some of the brilliant kind of wisdom that lives in folks who have done this work for so long, with Sujatha kind of telling us about where these early visionings offered space to make restorative justice ideas come to life, and how that has evolved and what we can be thinking about for the next wave of restorative justice work and the things we should be keeping in mind. So it's been a packed day. Like you said, it's kind of been a marathon, and I've loved every second of it. I'm feeling, a lot of energy that I think at the end of the year, so many of us are searching for that energy to keep us going after a full year of work, again, in a pandemic that, we're still waiting to find kind of the way out of. So I appreciate the time that everybody's offered us today. And, when we think about what it means to close the space and step into the work and these opportunities for breakout sessions, I just wanted to, kind of remind us that this is work that, even when we have questions about, whether or not we can trust the current, processes and systems that we have for safety, right? Those questions about whether or not safety actually even comes from those spaces are questions that really kind of make us think about, where can we find trust in a response that does provide safety, that does allow us to heal, that does, bring us closer to well-being. And I hope today, brought folks closer to a realization for what many of us know, that restorative justice can do that. Restorative justice does bring us, the hope that there's a different way to think about justice. There's a different way to think about healing and safety, and that it's doing that, right? There are so many examples, even in San Francisco and in the Bay Area, that are, really leading the way for that level of safety and trust and hope to be connected to folks' experience of justice. So I'm going to invite folks to, take the rest of this time to choose some of the breakout sessions that we have on offer. And I'll invite our team to put some of those links in the chat with information about what they are. But, our first breakout session is a visioning breakout session where folks will be invited to collaborate and create together with an activity to build individual and collective imagination around a future of safety, trust, and hope, right, within our own communities. As we know, that's how some of the early programs and the work that came out of work with Fania and Sujatha and others started, as visioning. So inviting folks to step into that space. Another breakout session will be with restorative justice facilitators, allowing folks to kind of ask questions about what it's like to facilitate spaces, experiences folks have had with facilitation. So if you want to kind of have that more direct conversation with folks who have been doing some of the facilitation work, that breakout session might be for you. And then the third breakout session is around organizing for restorative justice. And so that will be a conversation with, folks who are speaking about the ways that restorative justice is a movement builder, right? There's space for advocacy and organizing to build restorative justice into kind of the comprehensive resource that it is, and things like restorative justice aligned policy making and restorative justice, funding and structures that will help us make sure that restorative justice isn't just the programs, but it's really the ecosystem that needs to live around it. So those are the 3 sessions. They are dropped in the chat here. And before you all head out to those, we want to just invite all of the panelists from today, if you're still here, if you've stayed through the rest of the sessions, to turn on your video, and collectively we can all, extend some gratitude to the audience. And yeah, we would just love to thank everyone, thank all of the panelists for all of the time that you spent with us today. And I want to extend a special thank you to Amore, Sandra, Dee, Javier, Kevin, Patty, Jenna, Bree, Jody, right? Sujatha, our American Sign Language interpreters. You've all made this such a beautiful experience. And I know firsthand the amount of work that went into planning this from so many of you. It was amazing, right? Like, I think many of us were like, okay, we're going to do it. Let's see what happens. And it turned out great. So yes, love to you all. You should be very proud of the work that was put into this. It's been a beautiful time together. And yeah, thank everybody. Please join us in the breakout sessions. We will let you click on those links, and our facilitators for those sessions will join you there. Take such good care. We're stepping into the close of the year, the holiday season. Fill your days with love, reflection, and we'll see you all in San Francisco. Join some works, Bay Area, connect with these organizations. It's time to invite folks into the space and the movement. All right, take great care. Thank you, everybody.
And for folks joining us for the breakout rooms, just a few logistical notes. I did put the links in the chat. You also should have received an email from me with all of the links to the breakout rooms. And if anyone needs ASL interpretation to participate in the breakout rooms, can you please just indicate which room you'll be joining? That way we can make sure that we have interpreters available for you. Thank you.
Thanks, Bree.